What if what you call a weakness is actually the way forward? What if the very thing you keep avoiding is exactly what's meant to set you free? Have you ever stopped to wonder why certain fears keep chasing you? Why some feelings keep coming back, no matter how hard you try to bury them? What if I told you your dark side isn't holding you back? It's actually trying to lead you somewhere. This video is going to show you why what you're hiding might just be the key to uncovering your life's purpose. But fair warning, this isn't for people looking for comfort. It's for those looking for the truth. Most people go through life trying to improve themselves while ignoring the one part that actually holds the power to transform them: what they avoid. The things you hide, repress, or pretend don't exist inside you don't just go away. They gain strength in your unconscious. Jung made it clear: the parts of your psyche you refuse to integrate will end up running your life without you even noticing. That means everything you avoid facing, your fears, your traumas, your impulses, your grudges, your unspoken desires, keeps working behind the scenes, shaping your decisions, your relationships, and your sense of self. Ignoring that is like trying to steer a ship without knowing what's holding the wheel. Since childhood, we're taught to show only what pleases others, the parts that get praise, validation, approval. Everything else gets thrown out. But here's the catch: the psyche doesn't throw anything away, it just hides it. The anger you swallowed, the jealousy you denied, the pride you buried, it all ends up in the same place, your shadow. And the more you avoid this content, the more control it has over you. The fear of facing these parts creates a loop of self-deception. You pretend everything's fine, build a functional persona, and keep repeating the same mistakes, same conflicts, same emptiness. What you avoid actually owns you. Facing what's hidden inside you isn't some spiritual luxury, it's a psychological necessity. There is no real growth without inner confrontation. Jung never said to eliminate the shadow. He said to integrate it. And that starts by recognizing that everything you reject in yourself might hold exactly what you need to feel whole. Purpose, identity, inner peace. They're not built only with light. You have to go where your consciousness refuses to go, because it's there, in the place you least want to look, that the key to your transformation is buried. Carl Jung defined the shadow as everything the ego refuses to recognize within itself. It's a collection of traits, impulses, desires, and memories that were pushed out of conscious awareness because they clashed with the image of who we're supposed to be. But these parts don't disappear. They pile up in the unconscious and keep influencing our emotions and behaviors in subtle, indirect ways. The shadow isn't some poetic metaphor. It's a real active structure of the psyche. It's the natural outcome of socialization. To fit in, we have to suppress certain parts of ourselves. Whatever doesn't fit gets shoved into that hidden psychological space. And it's not just the dark stuff. The shadow doesn't only hold negative traits like aggression or selfishness. It can also hide repressed strengths like creativity, assertiveness, or sensitivity that were shut down in environments where they weren't accepted or valued. That means ignoring the shadow doesn't just cut you off from your flaws. It cuts you off from your potential too. According to Jung, the real danger isn't having a shadow, it's not knowing you have one. When these buried parts stay unconscious, they start to show up in distorted ways, usually through projection. You begin to see in others what you've disowned in yourself. And the worst part? You react with disgust, not realizing you're actually confronting your own reflection. For Jung, individuation, the path to becoming a whole human being, requires facing and integrating your shadow. That doesn't mean excusing toxic behavior. It means acknowledging that these parts exist and need to be understood. Without integration, you stay fragmented, trapped in a shallow version of yourself, and prone to emotional outbursts you can't explain. Jung didn't see the shadow as an enemy to be defeated, but as a vital part of the human soul that must be brought back into the whole. Without that step, there's no real psychological growth, just unconscious repetition. Most people see the shadow as some kind of inner enemy, something that needs to be controlled, ignored, or wiped out. But that's a naive and counterproductive way of looking at it. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to show you where you're split, where you lost connection with yourself. Jung understood the shadow as an emotional guidance system. Every intense discomfort, every emotional trigger, every obsessive thought, it's your psyche's way of signaling that something important is being neglected. The stronger the reaction, the deeper the unintegrated content. In other words, what triggers you, rules you, and also teaches you. Seeing the shadow as a guide takes psychological maturity. Instead of judging or suppressing your internal reactions, you have to investigate them honestly. Jealousy might point to insecurity. Anger could reveal where your boundaries were crossed. Guilt might expose inherited beliefs that no longer serve you. None of these emotions are the real problem. The problem is ignoring them. The shadow speaks through discomfort because that's what grabs your attention, and the more you listen, the more it reveals. It's an inner learning process, one where you stop being a victim of your emotions and start learning how to consciously engage with them. Turning the shadow into an ally is a turning point in the individuation process. It means letting go of perfection and embracing your full, messy, complex self. Life stops being a constant attempt at self-protection and becomes a journey of integration. Jung suggested we meet the shadow with firmness, but also with compassion. It's not about acting on every unconscious impulse. It's about understanding where those impulses come from and why they exist. The shadow isn't an obstacle to your growth. It is the path. If you learn to listen to it, it'll stop sabotaging you and start guiding you. When a part of your psyche gets repressed, it doesn't just vanish, it looks for a way out. And one of the most common and dangerous escape routes is projection. Jung defined projection as the unconscious act of assigning to others what you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. In simpler terms, the things you criticize, hate, or look down on in other people might be exactly what you're denying in your own shadow. That's why certain people irritate you for no clear reason. They embody traits you've buried deep, and because that's unconscious, your reaction comes out intense, like they're an actual threat. Projection is a loud, flashing sign that there's repressed material begging to be seen. Anytime your emotional reaction feels way out of proportion to the situation, chances are you've projected something internal onto someone else. It can show up as extreme moral judgment, disgust, jealousy, idolization, or even recurring conflict in your relationships. The problem isn't the other person. It's the part of you that you can't bear to face. Projection turns the outside world into a psychological mirror, and until you realize you're seeing yourself in others, you'll stay stuck in loops of blame, frustration, and resentment. Jung didn't suggest eliminating projection. That's not realistic. What he taught was the importance of becoming aware of it. When you catch yourself projecting, you get the chance to pull that energy back in and look at it for what it really is. That shift is incredibly freeing. You stop being at war with the world and start recognizing that every emotional spike is actually a breadcrumb leading you straight to your shadow. Once you see it clearly, projection stops being a defense mechanism and becomes a tool for deep self-awareness. And that's the moment when real consciousness starts to expand. We usually think of life purpose as something noble, high-minded, even selfless, but that's a romantic and incomplete view. Jung shows us that true purpose isn't something you go out and find. It's something that comes from within, especially from the parts of your psyche you've been ignoring. As uncomfortable as it may seem, the shadow holds key pieces of your identity. So many talents, desires, and callings get repressed because, at some point, they were labeled as wrong or unacceptable. But ignoring those impulses doesn't erase them, it just turns them into symptoms. That feeling of emptiness, apathy, or existential frustration, it often comes from refusing to hear what your shadow is trying to say. Purpose doesn't show up when you're trying to impress others or follow some external blueprint. It starts to surface when you reconnect with the parts of yourself you've silenced or abandoned. Just think of people who buried their creativity out of fear of being judged, only to wake up years later feeling like their life lacks meaning. The truth is, what challenges you also points you in the right direction. Repressed anger might be hiding a deep need for justice. Fear of being seen might be covering up a powerful, untapped voice. The shadow holds everything you haven't lived yet, and once you integrate it, that raw material becomes the foundation of your true purpose, the one that doesn't need anyone's approval. Jung once said that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you can only do that by owning the parts of yourself you've denied. The shadow stops being a burden and becomes a bridge, connecting who you were told to be with who you were born to be. That's the moment when pain turns into direction. Life purpose is no longer a logical goal. It becomes a byproduct of self-integration. Real purpose shows up when you stop running from yourself and start accepting that your truth includes both light and darkness. And it's that wholeness that makes you truly useful to the world. Repressing the shadow comes at a high cost. It kills creativity. Jung saw creativity as one of the most direct ways to communicate with the unconscious. When you suppress parts of yourself, out of shame, fear, or self-criticism, you shut down the channel that allows for authentic expression. People who feel blocked, uninspired, or stuck in repetitive creative loops are often dealing with unrecognized inner content. The shadow doesn't just carry trauma. It also holds ideas, desires, and visions that were discarded because they felt too weird to be accepted. But it's exactly that raw, unfiltered material where the spark of real creativity lives. In relationships, the shadow shows up even more clearly. Romantic partners, close friends, even co-workers often become mirrors for mutual projection. You don't attract repetitive patterns by accident. It's your unconscious trying to reconcile unresolved parts of yourself. What you haven't accepted in you tends to show up in the people you love, and sometimes the ones you can't stand. Jealousy, emotional dependence, rejection, and constant conflict are just symptoms. The real work is in asking, what is this reaction showing me about myself? Jung believed that every encounter with another is also an encounter with your own soul. Without shadow integration, relationships become battlegrounds. With it, they become powerful mirrors for growth. Integrating your shadow is what allows you to live with inner truth. That doesn't mean becoming perfect, it means becoming real. When you stop hiding parts of yourself, you begin to act with clarity, speak with confidence, and take a stand without fear. Authenticity doesn't come from being conflict-free. It comes from knowing yourself fully. And that self-knowledge shows up everywhere, in how you create, how you relate, and how you show up in the world. An integrated shadow gives you the freedom to be who you are. No masks, no performance, no shame. And that kind of freedom isn't just rare, it's deeply transformative. Integrating the shadow isn't just some abstract idea, it's a daily practice. The first step is learning to observe your emotional triggers. Anytime you feel intense anger, shame, irritation, or jealousy, there's a good chance you're bumping up against repressed material. Instead of reacting on autopilot, ask yourself, what is this revealing about me? What am I trying not to feel? Why is this hitting me so hard? This kind of self-questioning weakens the shadow's grip and creates room for awareness. The shadow doesn't dissolve with just one insight. It requires consistent awareness of your behaviors, your reactions, and your patterns. Beyond observation, you need to create a safe space for inner expression. That might be through journaling, inner dialogue, active meditation, or working with a therapist. Jung recommended a method called active imagination, where you symbolically engage with parts of your psyche to understand their messages. This approach allows you to explore shadow material without judgment, but also without blindly giving in to it. Integration requires balance, not repression, but not full identification either. You need to recognize it, understand it, and reintegrate it. Running, denying, or justifying what you feel only feeds the cycle of self-sabotage. Real transformation begins when you become intimate with your contradictions. Finally, you have to accept that integrating the shadow is a lifelong process. There's no finish line, no final healed state. The shadow is dynamic. It shifts as you grow. Every new level of awareness reveals new layers of repression. That's why this work never really ends. but it becomes more conscious, more grounded, and less reactive. Integrating the shadow in real life means taking emotional responsibility, recognizing that what hits you hardest out there might be the very thing you need to evolve in here. That's the real path of individuation. Stop running, start listening, and live with more truth, with yourself and with the world. The shadow isn't just a personal thing. It also shows up in groups, institutions, cultures, and even entire nations. Jung called this the collective shadow, the sum of all the traits a society represses to maintain an idealized image of itself. Whatever isn't publicly acceptable, like intolerance, violence, authoritarianism, or corruption, gets pushed into the collective unconscious. But just like with individuals, those traits don't vanish. They resurface during moments of crisis, ideological clashes, or moral collapse. When a culture refuses to face its own darkness, it becomes blind to the harm it's capable of inflicting. History is full of moments when the collective shadow broke through in devastating ways. Totalitarian regimes, ethnic wars, hate movements disguised as moral crusades. These things don't come out of nowhere. They're fueled by people who haven't done the inner work. And because of that, they're easy to manipulate by ideologies that give them an external enemy to blame for their inner anger, fear, or frustration. Jung was deeply concerned about the rise of the collective shadow and warned, the less the individual knows about himself, the greater the danger of the unconscious mass. In other words, the outer world is just a magnified reflection of unacknowledged personal shadows added together. Taking responsibility for your own shadow is, in that sense, a political and ethical act. It's not just about self-awareness, it's about breaking cycles of projection and violence. The more you understand yourself, the less vulnerable you are to emotional manipulation, and the more conscious you become of your role in shaping the world around you. Real change begins when people stop blaming the system, the government, or them, and start looking at themselves with brutal honesty. Once integrated, the shadow turns into clarity, and a clear, conscious society is less violent, less dogmatic, and far more capable of evolving with maturity. Integrating the shadow isn't a one-time goal. You check off the list. It's an ongoing path, one that demands constant presence, inner review, and a willingness to question yourself every single day. The human psyche is always in motion. Each new phase of life brings fresh challenges, new masks, and brand new blind spots. What you integrate today can turn into a new shadow tomorrow if you stop paying attention. That's why self-awareness isn't a weekend project. It's a lifelong commitment to truth. And truth, in this context, isn't comfort. It's clarity. It's the ability to look at yourself with both brutal honesty and deep compassion. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you truly are, fully and completely. Not just the version the world expects, but the one you were born to be. And that full version of you only starts to emerge when you stop avoiding your shadows and start having a real conversation with them. The shadow doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. And the more conscious you become, the more subtle it becomes too. That's why the wisest people aren't the ones who claim to be enlightened. They're the ones who know just how much they still don't know. Psychological humility is the fertile ground where inner freedom grows. And that freedom is what makes a life truly authentic. So here's the final invitation. Simple but not easy. Stop waiting to become your ideal self and start building a real relationship with who you already are. Light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, clarity and confusion. Because it's in that raw, honest meeting with your full self that the whole human being is born. The one who doesn't hide, the one who transforms the world just by being fully present, fully conscious, and fully true. The journey doesn't end, and that's a good thing, because every step on this path is another chance to become more free, more real, and more whole. If you've made it this far, you've probably realized that the biggest challenge in life isn't conquering the world, it's overcoming your own self-deception. The shadow isn't an obstacle to your growth. It's the very ground where real growth begins. Integrating these forgotten parts of yourself isn't some intellectual luxury. It's a spiritual and psychological necessity. because as long as you ignore what you carry inside, you'll keep repeating the same patterns outside. The world doesn't need perfect versions of you. It needs whole ones, people willing to stop pretending, to face their contradictions, and to live with real presence. Now I want to hear from you. What part of your shadow challenges you the most right now? Is it a fear that paralyzes you? A feeling you keep avoiding? A desire that scares you? Drop it in the comments. This might be your first step towards integration. Sometimes just naming what's been hidden is already an act of power. And your comment might inspire someone else who's standing in the exact same place. If this reflection resonated with you, hit that like button. It helps YouTube share this video with more people searching for a more conscious life. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this space is for those who want to grow, deeply, honestly, and with soul. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep walking with courage. Your shadow is waiting for you.